And we're live. We are live. Harley, what's going on, buddy? How are you? Hey, folks, listen. Thank you all for listening in. It is the one and only notorious, glorious V, the Girl Economist, coming to you live with my main man, Harley Schlanger. And if you don't know who Harley is, you've been living under a rock. Harley, so many things going on. You got the entire Ukraine dossier nonsense going on right now. And where do you want to begin? You have that. We have the morons with the climate protest with Greta Thunberg saying that she wants us to panic. She wants all of us to panic, Holly.
Well, I like the whole question of what's really going on beneath the mask of Greta, because she's just a front. The real story at the climate change summit was
Yeah.
the speech given by Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England.
Yep.
And we were talking about him the last couple of weeks because of his presentation about a new virtual currency, a regime change in finance, what he said at Jackson Hole. Well, he came out in the open and laid it out at the UN. And what he said is that there's a new task force on climate related financial disclosures that's been set up that Carney and other central bankers have pulled together. And he said, we wanted to bring climate risks and resilience into the heart of financial decision making, to have sustainable investing go mainstream. Now, then he went through how he's got 130 banks that have signed on to this that manage 49 trillion in assets.
Right.
And he said this task force on climate related finance and disclosures will make disclosures mandatory. That is, if you want to get a loan, you have to disclose where it's going. And here's what he said after that. He said firms that align their business models to the transition to a net zero world, in other words, net zero carbon world, will be rewarded handsomely. Those that fail to adopt will cease to exist. In other words, the major banks will not loan to companies that don't go with the green financial initiative. Yep. Now, there's your banker's dictatorship right there in front of the world within an hour after Greta's tearful geek act in front of the world's cameras.
You know, they have this mentally challenged kid, Greta Thunberg, and they stick her up there, and she doesn't know what she's saying. She can't go off script. She's literally talking. She's basically a political human shield at this point.
Exactly.
And Harley, we have to be very careful. We have to be very careful when the establishment puts crying children in front of a camera to berate adults. Because the last time I've seen a crying girl in front of a camera, Harley, was the buildup to the first Gulf War, where this girl was crying, lying to her teeth that Saddam Hussein's Iraqi army stormed the Kuwaiti hospitals and were kicking over incubators.
That's right. It's exactly right.
Yep.
And, look, I think the other part of this is that they are doing that to get people who read the media and watch the media to manipulate them. But the real message is what Carney said to the bankers. Either you work on the zero carbon world or you're going out of business. And that's the iron teeth behind Greta's tears. And I think it's interesting. The media presents her as a protest. And the question is, who's she protesting? The media's on her side. The banks and corporations are on her side. Most of the Democratic Party is on her side. So who's she protesting? The oil companies. Well, good luck in a world without oil and coal and nuclear right now. Correct. We're going to see mass death, among other things, of starvation, because you won't be able to move food from where it's produced to where it's needed in cities. So this is a transparent hoax. But since people don't hear the story, it's not transparent. They don't see it. But I think it's extremely important. I just wrote an article on this Carney intervention because I think there's rumors that he's going to be the next head of the International Monetary Fund.
Yeah, because we have the giraffe-necked woman, Christine Lagarde. She's going to be heading up the ECB after the abject failure of Mario Draghi. So that makes sense.
Yeah. Yep. So now the other thing that's interesting is he said that this is a new sustainable financial system that's being built. What's he talking about? They're pumping 50 to 75 billion dollars a night
Yep.
into the banks to cover payments on a 24-hour basis where there's no liquidity. There's
Correct.
no liquidity to be found, so they're using this to replace or to supplement the repo markets. These are usually 24-hour loans. Now they're 3 to 5 days, 7 days. They're going to continue this through October 10th. And what happens then? Magically, the the liquidity crunch will end.
Huh,
Uh,
no.
no, obviously they have something else in mind, which could be a move to negative interest rates or zero
Yep.
interest rates or some other scam.
Yeah. I
Maybe
mean,
they'll go
Harley,
live with the
this
digital currency on October 10th.
say it again.
Maybe they'll go live with the digital currency on October.
He'd be like Nicolas Maduro's Petro.
Well, and
You
then
know,
on October 12th, they'll be standing there with their undershorts around their ankles saying, well, don't look.
don't look. This is a wealth extraction scheme. Anybody who thinks that Wall Street really gives a damn about the environment or environmental causes, man, I have a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. Anybody who thinks that carbon or carbon dioxide is some sort of temperature control gauge that dictates the temperature of an entire planet, my God, I have a couple of bridges in the New York State tri-state area to sell you. But my goodness, Harley, this is a wealth extraction scheme. That's what it comes down to. What it comes down to is neo-feudalism. Mark Carney has no interest. Mark Carney, Mark Private Jet Carney, Mark, I have multiple houses Carney, Mark, I just take a Range Rover everywhere Carney does not care one iota about the environment. This is another carbon derivative scheme, and the fact that Wall Street's so gung ho about it, and the City of London so behind it, should cause people who are really interested in real, sustainability and real environmental concerns to really wonder, to really start taking notice here, Harley.
Well, they should. And I think it's also a time to recognize what is the context for this. On the
Right.
one hand, you have Brexit, which has introduced a whole new level of insecurity in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
But the other side of Brexit is the City of London has already covered themselves because they got the agreement from the European Union's market agency that they can disregard the ban on British involvement in European finance, that the clearinghouses in London can still work in the derivatives markets. So the City of London is covered on both of these sides. So
Right.
they don't care whether there's Brexit or not. But the people care. Look, I did an interview with someone from the United Kingdom today, and he just said that people are screaming. They're yelling at their television when they're watching the Supreme Court ruling in England that said that Johnson did something illegal with shutting down the parliament. He said people are enraged. And he asked me, what do you think will happen with this? And I said, we'll know in 32 days. But in the meantime, the city is doing everything they can, as you say, to extract wealth, or let's just say to extract paper
Mm-hmm.
or nominal values onto their balance sheet, which will end up being debt on governments and debt on people's credit cards and the theft of your savings accounts and so on. Now, the other thing that we were talking about at the beginning on this Ukraine situation, this is serious business. And some of your listeners have been saying recently, well, they think Trump is in on it. Trump's part of the deal. I think this should make clear to anyone who's sane that the people running Russiagate intend to destroy Trump because
Correct.
they can't control him.
Correct.
And the idea that he's in on it is he may not always know what he's doing. He's made a lot of bad decisions and bad choices of personnel, but he's considered by the bankers an enemy
Yes.
for good reason. He's trashing their system. He's throwing
Correct.
it out the window.
Yep.
The century and a half of British geopolitics is about to be destroyed by Trump.
Yeah.
And so what do? They go back to the same networks, these Ukrainian networks. And I'll tell you, here's where your listeners have to get really smart. Don't fall for the simple corruption story. Yeah, Biden, is he corrupt? Of course. Did he protect his son? Of course he did. Was this wrong for Biden to threaten the government of Ukraine that they're going to lose $1 billion if they don't fire the guy? Of course. But that's the simple level corruption. And unfortunately, people get all worked up about that and miss the big picture. Biden was the front man for the Obama administration's wrecking of Ukraine with the coup in February 2014. What was the purpose of that? To drive a deeper wedge between the United States and Russia.
Right.
And when Trump came in, they used those networks, those same networks, to get rid of Trump to try and prevent a healing of a US Russian relationship.
Hmm.
So the issue here is, as I've been emphasizing, as LaRouche PAC has been emphasizing from the beginning, is the change in paradigms from a British Empire geopolitical divide between East and West with an attack and an assault on any country that wants to maintain sovereign economic policy versus the emergence of a new Eurasian system, which could become a gold backed system or at least could be a fixed exchange system with the United States, with Trump as a participant, which would completely finish off Wall Street and the City of London.
Yeah.
So that's why they're so hysterical and using this obviously flimsy case. You know, the Nobel Prize for fiction this year should go to Adam Schiff for the version presented of this so-called call.
Adam the Fly Schiff.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny when you look at the entire Ukraine. I'll call it the rumor blower because you can't even call it a whistleblower, Harley, but a rumor blower. And
Doing something, that's for sure.
there's literally, you know, when I looked into the docs, and when you find out that 30 days before the quote unquote whistleblower went out there and blew his whistle, right, about a rumor that he heard the chief janitor who's friends with the cook whose maid heard something overheard by somebody else before that guy said what he had to say. 30 days prior, the very documents required for CIA whistleblowing was changed. It was changed to include rumors that they could have overheard via a third party, which is not in any sort of a definition what an actual whistleblower is. The question becomes who the hell on God's green earth has the power or the ability to do that, to randomly change a document and to push it through rapidly any sort of legal hurdles in order to get it ordained. Who would that be? Well, it's none other than Gina Haspel. Gina waterboarding Haspel. The same Gina Haspel who is in cahoots, who's actually a protege and a lackey of Johnny Jihan Brennan, who also had Gina Haspel. Now, check this out, Harley. Gina Haspel was the station chief in London during the time of the whole entire Christopher Steele dossier. Could that all be coincidence? I don't think so.
One other aspect of the Steele connection to all this. Who do you think was in Kiev writing 100 memos at the time of the so-called Maidan revolution that overthrew the Yanukovych regime? It was Christopher Steele.
Yep.
Who is he sending those memos to? Jonathan Weiner, the assistant to John Kerry. And Weiner then forwarded them to none other than Victoria Nuland, the neocon, who was the point person, along with Biden, for the overthrow of an elected government in Ukraine. Now, with all the concern the Democrats are showing with interference from Trump with Ukraine, with the US, what about the US overthrowing an elected government in Ukraine? The $5 billion that Victoria Nuland was sent through non-governmental organizations by the State Department, by George Soros, it was all coordinated to bring down the Ukrainian government and to facilitate the takeover of the country by neo-Nazis. You think there was corruption in Ukraine?
Yep.
Imagine having pro-Nazi militia running the Defense Department of Ukraine. And that's who Biden was working with. That's who John McCain was working with. And these are the networks that pulled this off. And I'm glad you mentioned Haspel, because the first thing I thought when I heard it's a former CIA or a CIA guy who's the whistleblower, first thing I thought was John Brennan, that this is what his stay behinds working against Trump.
Right.
So but the question that people have to really ask themselves is, why are they doing this? What are they terrified of? And the answer is very simple. If Trump is unencumbered by these intelligence operations, that is, if the Durham investigation, the Horowitz investigation starts putting some of these people away, or at least puts them under a spotlight, then Trump will be freed to talk to Putin, to talk again with Xi Jinping, to resolve the China trade deal, to resolve the outstanding strategic arms issues with Russia. If that happens, all bets are off because the whole basis of the existing military industrial complex, shadow government, deep state, whatever you want to call it, is old British Empire geopolitics. Divide and conquer, so no one challenges what's going on behind the scenes. And what's going on behind the scenes is not even behind the scenes. Although you couldn't find Mark Carney's speech at the UN anywhere except on the website of the Bank of England.
Mm-hmm.
So here's an extremely important presentation by the guy who's the point man now, working with BlackRock, working with Stanley Fischer,
Right.
Hildebrand from the Swiss National Bank, pulling together this consortium of 130 banks. And who's on the list? By the way, Citibank, which is practically bankrupt, Bank of America, Deutsche Bank, which just had its office was raided the day that once again, the day that Carney gave his speech. So the most corrupt financial institutions in the world are going to be overseeing a disclosure process of where credit is going. You know, this stinks to high heaven.
Absolutely. And this is the thing. The banks for the last, and I tell my clients this all the time when I'm trying to get clients to grow a spine in terms of taking control of their finances and not being afraid of the banks and what the banks have to do. One of the things I always say, listen, in 150 years of banking, what have the banks given you? They've given you an ATM machine and a debit card. In that 150 years, how many creative ways have they discovered, invented, and found out on how to fleece you, how to rob you, how to create all sorts of regulations and rudiments and rules in order to separate you from your money? Oh, thousands. So this is the thing. This whole thing with the environment and carbon credits and zero net carbon. Carbon is the hottest thing for them to trade because number one, it's a tax on life itself because carbon dioxide is a life driver. So number one, it's a tax on life itself. Number two, it's the ultimate derivative. What's greater than fiat? Well, how about the very air you breathe?
Yeah.
And that's the terrifying aspect of this that not many people don't get. And this is why I always keep telling people, Harley, you got to think bigger.
That's right. And what the whole Greta thing is used for is to keep people from thinking big.
Correct.
You know, if you think about what is it that the British have besides these intelligence networks inside every government, they have the Tavistock Institute. They have psychological programmers who are deployed to look into whatever the cultural proclivities are of populations,
Yep.
how they can manipulate them. This is what Cambridge Analytica is involved in. This is what the Google and Amazon are involved in, to find the susceptibilities and the vulnerabilities and the way people think and to exploit them. And if they're interested in sex, you give them free access to porn sites. If they're interested in shopping, you find out what they're buying and you keep flooding them with offers. You know, this is designed to make people absolutely incapable of seeing the bigger picture. And then they see Greta and they say, oh, the poor child, she's being deprived of her childhood. Well, she's deprived of her childhood by her damn parents.
Yep.
Or backers of Antifa.
Correct.
So, you know, if the story comes out, and by the way, the story is out. We just produced a pamphlet, which is must reading for your listeners, which is called Carbon Dioxide Reduction is Mass Murder Designed by Wall Street and the City of London. It's available at larouchepack.com. You can download parts of it there. You can purchase a hard copy. I think it's $20 or $25, something like that. But it goes through who in the financial community is involved in this. Who came up with this in the first place? This is not new. Bankers in the 20s were supporting eugenics and population reduction.
Correct.
head of the Bank of England at that time was Montague Norman, who organized a consortium which included the Harrimans, the Rockefellers, Schroeder's Bank, and Prescott Bush to fund Hitler. So this is not new that you have bankers who not only don't care about the poverty that they claim they're worried about, actually relish the idea of massive population reduction. So our pamphlet gives you the names. It gives you the quotes from these people from the 20s, from the 1960s, the 1970s, and then the current period. The quote from Obama, who in South Africa told South African young people who were there with stars in their eyes, hoping to get a pep talk from him. And his pep talk was, don't think you can have an American style standard of living, because if you get that, the planet will boil over. And then the same Obama gives Greta a fist bump and says, we're on the same team. He's right. Only he knows what the team is. She probably doesn't.
Absolutely. And the whole thing is all of these things of how dare you, and I want you to panic, and I want you to just, you've robbed my childhood, and all these things that they're that she's out there saying. This kid's parents are very suspicious, have a very questionable background to begin with. But most importantly, why is she talking to us in the West? When you look at quote unquote polluters, when you look at people that have or countries that have the most in terms of stringent environmental protection rules, it would be us. Notice that not one word is said against the Chinese, because they know that the her bankster buddies know that the Chinese don't play that game. They would quickly be smacked down very, very quickly, Harley. And they're not saying anything against India either.
Let's go a step further. John Kerry announced that he's going to pull together a coalition of the willing on climate change against the axis of climate deniers. You know who the top 4 climate deniers are on Kerry's list?
Who?
The US, Russia, India, and China.
There you go.
These are the 4 countries that could reverse the whole British-based financial system.
Correct.
China is interesting in this, because China is dealing with real pollution problems now, but they're doing it the way we used to, by developing new technologies, higher temperature burning processes. They're making a significant inroad in reducing pollution in China. But what they're not going to do is stop energy production, because they know without energy production, you don't have a physical economy. In the West, idiots like Merkel and her gang, and Macron and the Obama crowd, they're prepared to destroy what's left of our manufacturing sector.
Correct.
In the name of cleaning the environment. And as you point out, we have done quite a bit in the last 40 years to clean up water. To you don't have the Lake Erie catching on fire anymore. These kinds of things don't happen. But if you destroy the basis of life, carbon dioxide, if you reduce that further, it's not going to have a single effect on the climate, but it will probably kill off a large number of children in the poorest countries.
Yeah, exactly. And Harley, I can give a short list of over 6,000 products that are dependent upon petroleum. Over 6,000, everything from toothpaste to nail polish to your computer. I mean, people who like to buy electric cars, like Teslas or whatnot, they don't understand that it takes 22 barrels of oil to make your one Tesla.
Yeah.
They have no foggy idea. They think, yes, we're going to switch to windmill power, and then once we switch over to windmill power, and we're going to use solar, and then we'll be able to do the whole entire industry with no problem. No, that's a fantasy. This has and they know that the average public is dumbed down. They don't get this, Harley.
Well, the wealthy will have their own connections for plugging in their Teslas, but the rest of us are going to be walking on the side of pothole-strewn roads. The basic point with environmentalism is that it's been controlled by what we at LaRouche PAC since the early 1970s have called the eco-fascist movement, ecological fascist movement. It's about population reduction. The
Yep.
argument that there are resource shortages, well, we've always run into that. Any technology defines products or raw materials as resources that are finite. So, what you do as a civilization is you develop new resources. That's what we've always done. And
Correct.
today we have the enormous potential in plasma technologies, nuclear fusion, and so on that would eliminate any problem of energy production. But they're not going to allow that to occur. Why? Because that's science, and scientific advance is inherently democratizing. You rid the country of scientists, or you make science a product of underground labs so you can control it. And that's how the elite have been thinking since the writings of H.G. Wells and the Huxley brothers and so on.
Correct. Absolutely right. It is it's about control. It's about people don't understand. You start trading carbon. You let these banksters get a hold of carbon. The banksters and the technocrats that are enrolled by them will see to it that not only your air that you breathe is rationed, but your very life existence is rationed. Folks, this is why our founding fathers fought long and hard to make sure that government is weak. Because when government gets too damn big, it becomes a bloated problem. And statistically, Harley, it has always invited the most criminally minded.
Well, the one thing I would say on that is that when government is in the hands of the criminals, that's exactly what happens. And the problem is that with the reforms and the deregulation of the targeted deregulation of banking, it gave all the power to the banksters and the financial interests.
Yeah.
Now, that's one area where there should be some government regulation. But government regulation controlled by whom? The bankers? No, by the Congress, which is elected by the people. Now, here's where the problem comes in. As you're pointing out, people don't understand these things, so they don't know who to vote for. Well, last time they figured it out. They voted against Hillary and voted for Trump. I think that the same thing will happen this time as long as the Republicans don't take for granted that the absurdity of these Ukraine charges means they won't stick. There's such a concerted effort right now to convince people that Trump is a criminal, that he's engaged in nefarious activity. This has been going on since the beginning of his campaign, really, but it's escalated to an absurd point. But too many people are thinking, well, no one will buy this. Well, there will be people who buy it, or it will demoralize Trump supporters into thinking you can't win. We've got to have an attitude that's hell bent on winning. And by winning, it's not just the 2020 election, but by exposing and destroying the people behind the fraud in the man made climate change, so called science, the fraud of the banking, independent banking, central banks, and so on. We've got to destroy those myths and put real regulations in place that bankers cannot control government currencies. Because
Correct.
that's what Carney was talking about at Jackson Hole. That's what BlackRock was saying. Fiscal policy should now be in the hands of the bankers who make monetary policy. That's a global banker's dictatorship.
Yep. And once we cross that Rubicon, there's no going back.
That's right. But
Harley,
people, encourage your listeners, contact me. I'll put you in touch with the people to get this new report on CO2 reduction is mass murder designed by Wall Street and the City of London. Once you read it and get the facts, and they're at your fingertips, it will make you not only a better organizer, but a much more powerful force for good on the planet.
absolutely right. Absolutely right. Harley, thank you so much for popping in and sharing this with us. Folks, again, you can check him out over at the schillerinstitute.org, schillerinstitute.org, as well as larouchepack.com, larouchepack.com.
Don't
Harley,
forget,
any last words?
yeah, don't forget harleysch@gmail.com. That's where I'll hook you up with the LaRouche Pack pamphlet, harleysch@gmail.com.
Perfect. Very well said. And with that being said, folks, he is Harley Schlanger. I am the Notorious One, and we are over and out.